Hi, this is Professor Favors with American Literature. So today's lesson is on Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, and we are only going to look at stanzas 1 to 20. So make sure to have your document out. You can access it online. The Song of Myself, if you type it in as a research target, you should find a PDF. For my class, however, you do have access to a link. So this is American Literature, Walt Whitman's Song of Myself, stanzas 1 to 20. So this lesson is subject to fair use because I am including the 20 stanzas within this presentation, but it is for teaching purposes. So um, there are also pics, two pics of Walt Whitman as well. So this is subject to fair use. All right, so let's look at Walt Whitman. His date ranges 1819 to 1892. And so here's a picture of him. And I'm just going to read this slide and the next slide. The second of 9 children and born in 1819 to a Long Island farmer and carpenter, Walt Whitman is both the journeyman poet of Americanness and its champion. A journalist and newspaper editor throughout his life, Whitman worked as a law clerk, a school teacher, a printer, a civil servant, and a hospital aide, but he was always writing. From his teenage years until his death, his byline was on constant view. Contemporary reports suggest that Whitman was an industrious worker, but that he was often accused of idleness because his habit of long midday walks contrasted sharply with 19th century attitudes toward work. In Song of Myself, Whitman addressed these critics directly by writing, I loaf and invite my soul. I lean and loaf at my ease, observing a spear of summer grass. So the purpose of us only looking at 1 through 20, even though 21 through 52 might have the answer that we need. The only reason why we want to look at only 1 through 20 for Song of Myself is this idea here where Whitman is addressing his critics. He is being accused of idleness. He's being accused of idleness. Song of Myself is him addressing the critics. They're saying in a time of change, in a time of industry, in a time of work is important to us. 19th century attitudes towards work. He is being idle. So then the 52 stanza Song of Myself is his response to the critics. And that's why we're only going to look at 1 through 20 because 1 through 20 really gives us what we need. Okay. So when you are reading the 20 stanzas, Song of Myself, understand that everything that he is saying, line by line, stanza by stanza, is in a response to the critics who say he's idle within the context of 19th century attitudes toward work. All right, so for Whitman, too much industry dulled the ability to celebrate the ordinary. In the preface to the first edition of Leaves of Grass in 1855, Whitman expounds on his love for the common. Other states indicate themselves in their deputies, but the genius of the United States is not best or most in its executives or legislators, nor in its ambassadors or authors or colleges or churches or parlors, nor even in its newspapers or inventors, but always most in the common people. Whitman's love for the common people that he encountered and observed in the urban centers of the North is expressed in all his poetry. If his British contemporary Alfred Lord Tennyson is the national poet of mourning, then Whitman is the national poet of celebration. So, what you see here with Whitman, too much industry, too much industry dulled the ability to celebrate the ordinary. Every day there is a ordinary experience. And what he's suggesting here that all of these people who are about industry, and call it genius, right? So these are the folks who are business executives. These are the folks who are state, federal legislators. These are some of the people who are ambassadors, authors, colleges, churches, parlors, even newspapers or inventors. These are the people who are so busy with industry, and there's nothing wrong with industry in a sense that you still need to put your hands to work. But he was saying that people spent too much time in industry to the point that they missed the commonness of people, everyday ordinary living. And so again, Song of Myself is a response to the critics that you are spending too much time in industry. You're not celebrating the ordinary. You're calling yourself genius because of all these different categories, right? It's like a person listing all of their accomplishments on their resume. You do this, you do this, you do this, but there's some aspect of your life that you are missing out on. And that's what he wants to call attention to. All right, so let's look at some historical implications. Remember from the introductory PowerPoint lesson to the course um, on time periods, that every time you see something in terms of a time period 1819 to 1892, his his birth and death dates, and that's the 19th century. You want to look at what was going on during that time. Now, there's a lot more that's going on. I just only put here the most necessary, but let's look at it. So, 1819, we have the Panic of 1819, which is a financial crisis. Somewhere between here, we also had another financial crisis, somewhere like 1837. Thomas Jefferson founds the University of Virginia. So then we have different states becoming states, or different territories becoming states. So Maine and Missouri becoming a state. Florida becomes a U.S. territory. We also have Thomas Jefferson and John Adams, the presidents, dying on the same day, and then Andrew Jackson becoming president. We have Nat Turner's revolt, also slavery debates. We have Oberlin College beginning enrolling female students. This is a change in the dynamic of all men being able to go to college, right? And many of the institutions having to create uh, separate institutions for women, separate institutions for Black Americans. And so you're going to see this again in your final paper for this course on single sex colleges. And the title of that is Are Single Sex Colleges Obsolete? And so then 1845, we have Florida and Texas becoming states. Then we have the Mexican American War. What is interesting here is 1857 is kind of like a current issue that's going on today. But this was Dred Scott v. Sanford, and he sued based on the idea that he was free from slavery. And so slaves and blacks, um, the conclusion of the suit, the judge's decision, slaves and blacks descended from slaves were not American citizens and cannot sue. So then later we ended up having Emancipation Proclamation, which freed the slaves, Reconstruction era, assassination of President Abraham Lincoln. Then the 13th Amendment abolished slavery. The 14th Amendment granted citizenship and equal protection under the law, meaning that we're not necessarily equal. It's a citizenship amendment, but it basically means that it's equal application of the law. So if men can go to college, women can go to college. If white people can go to college, black people can go to college. So it's equal application of the law. So now this is the industry aspect of um, Whitman's critique. 1865 to 1913, these were two major industrial revolutions. Then there was a global transition towards manufacturing, technological improvements, rapid economic growth in these areas here. So during the 19th century, where there's a heavy attitude towards work and industry, within this context here of the 19th century, we have critics who are criticizing Walt Whitman that he's not industrious enough. And so keep this in mind as we go through all the different slides. So we're looking at the immediate text. Whenever you want to look at a literary work, you look at the immediate text. You don't go and find um, secondary source material to try to understand the text itself. You want to take some time to learn how to look at the text yourself, and that's what we're going to do. All right, let's look at stanza 13, the Negro and the tread. So now we have a contrast between the previous stanza 10 about the runaway slave. Now we're moving into the characteristic of the Negro. All right, stanza 13 has another slide as well. The Negro holds firmly the reins of his four horses. The block swags underneath on his tied over chain. The Negro drives the long dray of the stone yard. Steady and tall, he stands poised on one leg on the string piece. His blue shirt exposes his ample neck and breast and loosens over his hip band. His glance is calm and commanding. He tosses the slouch of his hat away from his forehead. The sun falls on his crispy hair and mustache, falls on the black of his polished and perfect limbs. I behold the picturesque giant and love him, and I do not stop there. I go with the team also. In me, the caresser of life, wherever moving, backward as well as forward, slewing. To niches aside and junior bending, not a person or object missing, absorbing all to myself and for this song. Oxen that rattle the yoke and chain or halt in the leafy shade. What is that? What is that you express in your eyes? It seems to me more than all the print I have read in my life. So the Negro here, contrasted in stanza 10, the Negro here has more freedom. He's not considered a runaway slave. So the runaway slave is considered property. The Negro has moved out of property to personal agency. He can move about. So that means there may be a historical implication here of the Emancipation Proclamation here. Negro, I don't remember what the timeline of Negro in terms of black people, the um, being referred to Negro. Um, so I don't know when that began. I would have to look that up on my own later. But there is a contrast, right, between the stanzas. So when you think about um, the differences between first person and third person, we have Negro holds something, block swags, Negro drives something, steady. Then we have his blue shirt exposes his ample neck and loosens. His glance is calm and commanding. The sun falls on his crispy hair on his back. And then we shift from third person to I. So we shift from a perception of a character in history and the Negro, right, in history, moving from stanza 10, a runaway slave, to now a new demographic, gender based, race based category. Now we move to the actual, we return to the poet. So I behold the picturesque giant. I do not stop there. Okay. I go with the team also. In me, the caresser of life, wherever moving, backward as well as forward slewing. And we are convinced that when he calls himself a caresser of life, that we can sort of believe him because of how he treated the runaway slave with hospitality. We don't see any racial animus of the poet towards the red girl. He's just giving you, he's basically, Whitman is just giving you the context of the time. And so our perception of how Whitman perceives the runaway slave, and then in contrast to the Negro, has some consistency because he doesn't provide any sort of racial animus towards these characters. Okay, and then it seems to me more than all the prints. So oxen that rattle the yoke and chain or halt in a leafy shade. What is that you express in your eyes? What is your expression? What's going on with you? That this yoke and chain, which was actually referred to, which was really applied to um, the runaway slave, is not applied to the Negro. This reference to yoke and chain is not applied to the Negro. It's applied to the oxen, the actual animal. Whereas in history, Negro runaway slaves, they were treated like animals. They were treated like property, assets, etc. So, what is it? How do you feel? What is that you express in your eyes? Because an oxen is supposed to be yoked and chained. The oxen that rattle the yoke, they're supposed to be because they're considered animals. But what is it when you look at an animal that is in yoke and chain? What is that expression? Do they believe that they're supposed to be yoked and chained, or do they believe that they're not supposed to? Animals don't have that kind of contemplative, critical thinking skills, but you can perceive an animal if the animal is trying to get out of the yoke and chain. That in that animal, not all living things do not want to be yoked and chained. Yoke and chain here also kind of refers to a biblical uh, reference here, and and the scripture reads, "Do not be unequally yoked with unbelievers." And so that may have some sort of biblical implications in this. I'm not quite sure, but it is worthy to note that the poet does not link yoke and chain to the Negro, and he didn't link yoke and chain to the runaway slave because of the hospitality he shows him. All right, the rest of stanza 13. So my tread scares the wood drake and wood duck on my distant and day long ramble. They rise together, they slow circle around. I believe in those winged purposes and acknowledge red, yellow, white playing within me. And consider green and violet and the tufted crown intentional. And do not call the tortoise unworthy because she is not something else. And the jay in the woods never studied the gamut yet trills pretty well to me. And the look of the bay more mare shames silliness out of me. So the tread is, of course, a walk. It's usually how you walk is your way, and the tread is walk in a specified way. Your walk, your manner of life. Okay, and then the walk when you're thinking about we're still in third person plural. So my tread scares the wood drake and wood duck on my distant and long day ramble. They rise together, they slowly, there's that they, third person plural. Long day ramble is something that rambling is something that we've always done, like how we talk, how we ramble about without any purpose. Well, remember, Song of Myself is about idleness. So here it is, we have this certain walk that we have, but it still leads to idleness, right? To ramble. um but the wood drake and the wood duck, they rise together, they slowly circle around. I believe in those winged purposes here would have some idea about um what is included in having a purpose, right? The winged purposes connected to something. Like wings are connected to the base of a bird. The wings are not separate from the bird itself. So your purposes that you go after should not be separate from who you are as an individual. Sometimes though the purpose can be sometimes your purpose can lead to rambling or idle and you not necessarily accomplish anything. However, if the goal is to be idle, then you have accomplished something. The red, yellow, white, it could mean a lot to do with race. How we often say, I don't care if you red, yellow, white, green, purple, that type of thing. It could mean that. And then for this, um, uh, for this, let me see if Rambo is further defined. It doesn't look like it's further defined. The tread isn't further defined. But the perception of the tortoise, the jay in the woods, that's the bird, and then the mare, the animal, they all have their purpose. They all have their purpose. All right. So that's stanza 13. All right, so here's some resources, research archives, and educational information. So Walt Whitman Birthplace Association website, then research archives list of links you can find on that website. Some are good links and some are not. So I added a Walt Whitman archive link here, and then of course the source pick. All right. Thank you very much for listening.